Hi, everybody. Um, my name is Stacy Erdman, and I'm the Digital Preservation and Curation Officer and Acting Digital Repository Manager at Arizona State University. I'll be your chair for this session, which is Stream 3, the best of digital preservation in 2020. There are 2 other concurrent streams going on at this time slot, so please double check and make sure this is the stream that you want to attend. Our tech lead, Angela, will provide links in the chat box to these other streams just in case you do need to switch. She'll also link us to the collaborative note-taking document in the chat. So if you're a note-taking whiz and wouldn't mind helping out there, that'd be great. As I'm sure you've heard in other sessions, We Miss iPres is an informal gathering. We're here to share and learn, but also to connect and have fun. I believe William Kilbride from the DPC actually asked us to be jolly. So I expect everyone here to take that to heart. However, we have 5 jam-packed presentations in this stream, so I'll be keeping a close eye on time. Each presenter in the stream has 8 minutes for their presentation. I'll be playing a warning sound when they have 1 minute remaining, and I'll also play the same sound when their time is up. Please feel free to submit any questions that you have for the presenter directly into the chat box. Our co-chair, Patricia, will be monitoring the chat and will pick a single question for the presenter to answer. They'll then have 1 minute. That's it. If we have time at the end of the session, Patricia will get to more of your questions. Our speakers have some really exciting project updates to share, so let's go ahead and kick things off. Our first presenter is Douglas White, who leads the National Software Reference Library project at NIST, and Doug will be presenting recent advances on the National Software Reference Library. Take it away, Doug.
We've got a presentation from him, so I'll start sharing my screen.
Hello, I'm Doug White. I lead the National Software Reference Library project at NIST. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to you about recent advances at the NSRL. I need to call attention to our disclaimer. I'll provide a brief history and then talk about advances in our collection focus, process, and publications. When the project began, it needed to be traceable back to a physical collection. We have over 450 meters of shelves full of original software, equating to over 20,000 titles. The majority of the collection covers the range of years from 1998 to about 2018. All of the physical media has been imaged and materials photographed. The core of the NSRL has always been the physical collection, the virtual collection, which is the media images and photographs, the database of all the metadata we collect, and then the reference data set that we publish, which is a subset of that database. As physical distributions declined, we started ramping up our download-only collection, including mobile apps and online platform games, and also ramping up our virtual machine installation so that we could collect other reference data and publish that based on installation of titles, execution, patches, etc., and also registry data. And we are what the SAA calls a dark archive. We are not a lending library, except in one particular case. But we do allow researchers to have access to all of the original files, all of the original media images that we have, and to our database. And we have some examples of some collaborators coming. Into NIST or sending their algorithms to us to run on NIST campus. Our collection focus has always been popularity, which is what are the files and titles most likely to be found on computers that are part of a digital investigation. We get guidance from law enforcement agencies through a steering committee to either gather benign software or malicious software or software related to news items, let's say. But we have stopped collecting physical media. We have just completely stopped that. We are limiting the large items that we acquire, such as the downloadable gaming platform items, to one version per quarter, which is our publishing cycle. And we are focusing more on live system captures now. This is just a quick review of what our collection process was at the start of the year. On the left-hand side, you can see we used a public ISP to download high-risk large items to a station on our campus. And using our campus connection to the internet, we were able to download low-risk and small objects to stations on our campus. From both of those places, we created Library of Congress BAGIT objects and actually physically carried them to a SneakerNet gateway through which we uploaded the bag contents onto the NSRL network. Now that we are all working from home, off campus, again, I'll start on that left-hand side of the diagram. We still use a public ISP to download items, high-risk large downloads, onto the machines that are on our campus, but we are going through our firewall and to an IP-based KVM in order to control those machines that are still on the campus. So we're still gathering our big downloads through the same way, but we've had to use a different secure way in order to get onto campus to monitor those machines. And again, it's sneaker netted. Library of Congress BAGIT objects when we can go on campus, usually about once a month. We are sneaker netting those over, and we can keep track of how those are filling our SneakerNet disks. We have been fortunate in that all of the people who are working from home do not have caps on their ISPs. So everyone working from home is able to download the small, low-risk items from the internet. Combine them into Library of Congress BAGIT objects, upload them into an unsecure cloud location. So everything that our staff can do for the general collection of the low-risk small items can be done without using our VPN. You know, they've got access to the internet, they've got access to an unsecure cloud location, so they can keep working without sending any extra data over our VPN, which is key in these times. So we've got a process where when they do that, they also out of band send a catalog of what they've downloaded from the internet and uploaded to our unsecure cloud. So as that BAGIT object progresses from the unsecure cloud to a secure cloud to our cloud gateway now, that out-of-band information and the actual BAGIT object meet, and we can verify that yes, what we're expecting to pull down from the cloud storage is what should have been sent to us. When we verify that, do a couple of other checks, then things pass through the cloud gateway into the NSRL network. So that's our new collection process. We'll probably be doing a lot more cloud-based things in the near future. And our publication has been 4 flat text files, which are exported from our database. We're changing that very soon. We've got some test data sets out to vendors, and we're just waiting for some feedback on that. But we will be publishing SQLite exports of our publishable database content, plus SQL scripts for views, other exports that researchers might be interested in from that database content. One of the big things that we'll put in the hands of researchers is the NSRL key IDs for our images, for our files, etc., that people would be interested in accessing when they have access to the research environment that we have. So instead of trying to talk back and forth about, what exactly are you looking for, we can specifically say, if you're looking up DLLs in our particular database, then these are the key IDs that you would ask for access into our corpus storage of those files. So we're hoping to have a better rapport with researchers here in the future. And if you have any questions, further questions after this conference or this session, you can email the NSRL team at the email address on the screen, nsrl@nist.gov. Thank you very much, and I look forward to a few questions.
Thank you, Doug. That was great. Patricia, are there any questions in the chat?
I didn't see any in the chat, but maybe people want to ask them now, just by saying something.
Yeah, if you want to unmute yourself and ask in person, that'd be fine.
There's a question from Joanne asking, what is the biggest challenge with the collection?
The biggest challenge really is just the sheer volume that's out there. I mean, we recognize we're a drop in the bucket. With mobile apps, things change so fast, you can hardly keep up. And now with Blizzard Steam games that just fill up people's disks with the gaming titles, volume is an issue too.
And the other question is from you and Cochrane. Anything new coming in SQLite exports, metadata-wise?
It's going to be everything except for the internal tracking metadata that we keep in our regular database. So it's going to be the full set. It's going to have, the SHA-256s that aren't in the RDS publication right now, but all of the interconnecting tables, etc. If you've ever gotten a database set from us, it's going to be that, but in SQLite.
Great. Well, thank you, Doug. Next up, we have Alex Garnett, Research Data Management and Systems Librarian at Simon Fraser University, who is presenting Aesthetic Trends of Compression Artifacts.
All right, thank you, Stacy, and thank you, Doug, for a great talk. I'm excited to share this work. I did it very much on a whim. It's very We Miss iPrezi. It's something that I was interested in for quite a while, but I'm not sure I would have actually had the presence of mind to do it in this format otherwise. So I thank you all for that. So I'm very interested in the aesthetic trends of compression artifacts, specifically in what is judged good enough over time and what compression is tolerated. So video artifacting is something that we're all probably pretty familiar with. Basically, compressed video or images exhibit different artifacts. Corey Archangel, the net artist, wrote a really good overview of how iframes and p-frames are used in video formats back in 2007. Basically, you have an iframe, which is the whole image. You have p-frames or b-frames that store diffs from one frame to the next in order to try to save space. And compression formats often don't use enough p-frames, or they use insufficiently rich p-frames, leading to artifacting and visual degradation. The most obvious form of that in modern video is macro blocking, and I have used my favorite free animation, Big Buck Bunny, to demonstrate macro blocking. I've taken a good encode, then I deliberately made some really crummy encodes to FFmpeg, and so you can see, I'm not sure how fast the zoom is refreshing, but the bottom frame, you can see almost blocks in the image because the bitrate is so low. And that's macro blocking. If we look at the Big Buck Bunny credits, once again, you can see the bottom portion. It almost looks like falling blocks, like a waterfall or Tetris, and that's what you get when you deliberately use really poor compression to get really, really deliberate artificial macro blocking. So we all know about that. These are pretty common, especially in H.264, which is a really, really common streaming codec for HD video. It's been very, very widespread for about a decade. This is what you get from Netflix, from Prime, from Hulu, from everywhere else still. There are successors, but they're all JPEG-derived codecs. H.264 was just the right one at the right time. And they're ubiquitously hardware decoded and encoded, so they are pretty widely supported. So we all kind of get used to this. Bit rates of these streaming services are often quite low to save on bandwidth. From a climate change point of view, we probably don't want Netflix generating, more emissions than all of Iceland. And their solution to this is to encode your media at a pretty low bit rate. And so now that physical media is less widely available, these become the canonical consumer copy of a lot of films. So people come to tolerate a commercial film streaming at 3 megabits a second, which does generate in its way a lot of degradation. So if we look here, this is a clip from John Cassavetes' Shadows. This is a black and white film, and this is a approximately 3 megabit encode, so it's like what you get off of Netflix. It's not terrible, but you can see there's a lot of noise in the portions that should be really dark and black and white. And to me, like as a cinephile, as a preservationist, I find this very offensive, that this is often the best available copy. I've been doing like streaming watch parties with my friends during coronavirus, and a lot of what led me to this work was realizing just how bad a lot of the best available copies we could get for our own fun screenings were. So this is currently judged as tolerable, I feel like oftentimes, because it's what's available. And that trade-off is really interesting to me, because what's tolerable, I think, changes with the era of the technology. Black levels are really contentious. People fight about them on web forums a lot. When you're buying like an HDR TV set, people talk about those things. They add a lot of noise where there should be quiet. And sure enough, this is a dance recording from our collection at SFU that I was recently working with. And you can see, because it's a fairly dark video, the artifacting on the dancer on the right is really bad. This is not our master copy, but this was the H.264 that came out of our preservation system as the default access copy. And you can see just how unacceptable that is at default parameters, right? Like we think that H.264 is good enough for access without having to tweak it very much. We're going to store our good FFV1 copy, whatever. But to me, this artifacting is still really, really difficult to get past. And the baseline that we establish is often not great. So I worry about that. There are other forms of artifacting as well. So this is the current H.264, but the Twitter user Foon, who does a lot of old technology stuff, was recently circulating some FMVs from old FMV games that used old QuickTime codecs. The artifacting here is different. You see a lot of pixel crawl on this person's figure. I've heard this referred to as a moshing pattern. There was a recent thesis in Ireland that talked about what those different compression artifacts look like. The color depth is lower, but you see a lot more crawl. Not as much in the dark areas, but everywhere. And lo and behold, that sort of comes back over time. This might be giving you a headache to watch. It makes me kind of dizzy. This is a post-processing effect that NVIDIA shipped for a recent video game using their new super sampling technology that tries to extrapolate a 4K image from a 1080p one. And because the ground truth is not as high resolution, when the camera pivots, they're trying to extrapolate more data than they actually have, and it makes me dizzy. And so you see that moshing artifact comes back over time, again, because this is the best available format. And so the tolerances for a lot of these really change, and I'm actually very curious personally, aesthetically, as to how they change our expectations of watching video and what sort of degradation that we're going to tolerate, and also whether that in turn informs video creators' choices. I've seen YouTubers talk about like trying to pursue hyper-saturated colors to avoid compression algorithms, making their videos look like interesting, which to me is scary because it means that we're all going to, have hyper-saturated, brightly colored videos for children pretty soon if a generation of cinematographers and video producers grow up and that sort of thing. So I worry about that. And this is seen across the board in a lot of different contexts. Rosa Menkman maintains this really great site, A Lexicon of Glitch Affect, in which she tracks the development over time of deliberate glitching, again, in commercial film and television. So, everybody knows sort of what a VCR like stop play overlay looks like, or what old basic cable distortion looks like. But as people grow up with that or don't, and they change their expectations for glitch affect, you see some interesting patterns over time. So I'm sort of interested in doing the non-deliberate equivalent for a lexicon of glitching. I want to see, you know, how consumer trends for good enough video have changed over time. Rosa Menkman's approach is more artistic. Mine, I actually just want to see, like, what are people downloading? What are they having to put up with? And how does that inform their judgment? You know, why is this? This is a hockey game between, I think, the Habs and the Leafs from the 70s. Why is this now less tolerable? Because the colors are all blown out, but at least you don't get that same digital artifacting, right? It changes what you come to expect. There's also some neat work. You see folks trying to upscale their copies of Star Trek DS9 from the old DVDs because it was never officially remastered into HD. And again, you see people trying to blow out those old 480i signals using a grab bag of Windows binaries. They're not using FFmpeg, they're not using open source tools, not using best practices, but they are trying to do their best with that ground truth to try to make it comparable visually to what you want to see now. Interestingly, a lot of this stuff boils down to being a very computationally expensive way of compensating for no longer having an old CRT TV that would look good at older resolutions and whose TV snow would be more natural. So again, thinking about the greenhouse gas emissions, you know, Netflix doesn't want to encode at high bit rates, but instead you've got folks trying to use like way more computational power just because they no longer have older media that can be transferred faithfully. So that part's interesting. It's not necessarily desirable. You know, there's a very large possibility space here, and a lot of what's thought of as best practices is often very fixed to current technology. If we look at video games, when emulators first became popular in the late 90s, you had on the left people trying to upscale their video games to make them look like they were native on like a 1024 by 768 LCD. And so you get the colors blown out and the details sharper than they were actually meant to. On the right-hand side, you actually see the common state of the art, which is to add a deliberate CRT blurring filter. And so you get softer details and it looks more like the colors were designed to in the first place. So there's a subtle change in what's desirable and what's thought to be more faithful. And again, you see that element of it taking orders of magnitude more powerful modern technology to reproduce older technology. We've sort of abandoned the halfway step, and we are getting closer to it, but I wonder how much more this will change in the future. The movie Predator was remastered on Blu-ray at one point, and they denoised the hell out of it because, again, that was thought to be desirable at one point. You know, make it look smooth. And I think we're getting away from that, but consumer trends are as interesting to me as preservation trends. I want to know what most people are expecting to get out of an upscale. When we talk about the value add for video preservation, I want to know what the layperson is taking away from it and how that translates into their expectations. So obviously, keeping original masters is great, but I really do think that our standards of presentation and for good enough do change quite a bit over time, and I want to see how they change and how they inform our thinking. So that's it. I think I've gone a little bit long. Thank you for tolerating me talking really fast. I used a lot of fun tools in this talk. This presentation is using Reveal.js. GIFsicle was very useful in making those GIFs. It's a great way of showing live video clips like that. And Lossless Cut, if you don't know about it, is a really nice way of using FFmpeg with a GUI just to make really, really quick snips on longer video. So thanks very much. You can find me at AXFelix on Twitter and always cite Big Buck Bunny. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. That was cool. Does anybody have any questions for Alex? Nothing in the chat?
There's nothing on the chats.
Okay. I actually let Alex go a little over because he was on a roll, so.
Thank you, Stacy.
You're welcome.
Maybe we can leave some time at the end if there's more questions then.
Yeah. So next up we have Elizabeth England and Leslie Johnson, both from the U.S. National Archives and Records Administration, and they'll be presenting on the NARA Digital Preservation Framework release.
Great. Thank you so very much. I am just bringing up my slides. Come on. All right. I'm Leslie Johnston, and I am the Director of Digital Preservation at the U.S. National Archives, and I'm speaking today with my colleague Elizabeth England about our recent work in the release of our Digital Preservation Framework. So the work actually started a couple of years ago with a collections format profile. And the reason this was significant for us is that we actually have 9 instances of 4 different systems that each have different tooling around digital preservation, and they also operate under different regulations. So they have different levels of access, not only for the public, but for staff. So we needed to actually get a better handle on everything that we had in all of those systems. We used a manual process, and I spoke about this at IPRES a couple of years ago, and if anybody's interested, we can provide a link to that paper. But we had to use a manual process to combine the reports from all of the systems. The reports were all at different levels of granularity, so it was very interesting to actually combine all of those that then required normalization across the reports. Because of the different granularity levels, one system might tell us that a file is an Adobe Acrobat PDF, while another system would tell us that another file is Adobe Acrobat 1.4. So we had to do the normalization across the aggregation, and we ended up with a list of several hundred file format versions across the systems, comprising about 2 billion files at the time. Our second step in developing our framework was coming up with a process for assessing risk. So we developed a risk matrix, which is a spreadsheet instrument that applies a series of weighted factors that are related to the preservation sustainability of each of the file formats that we had identified in the collection format profile, and those generated a numeric score. So each of those questions has a different type of relative weighting that maps to level of risk. And to the extent that we could define it, which we could not always, resource costs, which could be either staff time or available tools or budget. This includes these high-level factors that really take into account our current environment and capabilities. There are tools that we currently have, tools that we have on a wish list that we don't yet have, tools that we can't always easily acquire because they're not available to us as a United States federal agency. And so we sometimes do and run processes that may not always be what everyone else recognizes as the best or most efficient, but it's what we're currently capable of. So we currently calculate high, moderate, and low risk, and those thresholds are open to review and revision over time for us. So the third step was developing preservation action plans. And those plans really take into account both the essential characteristics for electronic records that are held in our holdings. And those characteristics and plans also document risk, they collate lists to specifications and other digital preservation resources, and that what our current internal recommended actions are and the plans that we're going to use. So we needed to separate this into 2 different types of documents. One is a record type plan. Our transfer guidance to federal agencies are about each type of record, whether it's email, GIS, database, still image, audio, video, digital video. And each of those have their own sets of essential characteristics that fall under appearance, structure, behavior, and context. These are the properties that should, if possible, be retained in any migration. And we use those as metrics both in appraisal and to test potential tools. We also have a plan that is a single spreadsheet that contains over 500 file formats and format versions across all of the record types. And of course, formats can be part of different record types, such as PDF or XML. It contains the links to the specification, other resource links, such as to archive team or to Wikidata, other format information, the preservation actions that we currently use, and across all the record types. And our goal in this is ensure that the framework's actionable and extensible, not just for our use over time, but for other institutions. And now I will hand it over to Elizabeth.
All right, so in 2019, a draft of the Digital Preservation Framework was made available on NARA's GitHub. I've provided the links in the chat. And there was a few-month period for feedback, and the comments generally fell into a few categories. First, we needed to clarify that the plans represent NARA's current practices based on current infrastructure and capabilities and are not necessarily recommendations for the entire field. It was also recommended to provide more granular descriptions by breaking format families down to the versions. So again, with PDF, it's now broken out by version, and this has enabled better one-to-one matching with Pronom and Wikidata records. There were also suggestions of formats to include for analysis, such as calendars, ebooks, some statistical data and database formats. Between this and breaking the families down into versions, we added more than 150 new entries for a total of more than 500 format preservation action plans, as Leslie said. And for each format entry, we have links to other resources such as Pronom, Library of Congress, Wikidata. And then another area of feedback was to make the plans more actionable. So in the original draft, the plans were presented in text documents, but we moved them from being in those text documents to a single spreadsheet and CSV file. And they're more actionable, and also will support linked data mining for Wikidata as we're working towards that. Next slide. So in June 2020, after completing these revisions, we released the first official framework a few months ago. You can access it at this URL here, which is also in the chat. And the framework is available in the public domain, so use and reuse are widely encouraged. We know some other institutions have been using it to conduct risk analysis and preservation planning on their collections, so we love hearing about that and getting your feedback, because it will influence the direction that we go. And the framework can be used across the life cycle. Its sustainability metrics provide context for records creator and management guidance, are integrated into electronic record selection and appraisal criteria, are used in evaluating processing and preservation tools, and support the selection of formats used when providing public access. The plans are iterative, and we will continue to add new formats, update our preservation recommendations, update our practices with new tools, and revise with links to new and updated community resources. Constantly, there's new FDDs coming out from Library of Congress, and I'm grabbing those URLs and putting them in for our upcoming release. So it really is a community effort. And that is all. Thank you.
And we are happy to answer any and all questions.
Thanks, Elizabeth and Leslie. Are there any questions in the chat?
There is one question by Kay Nauman about, sorry, it's moving. Why did you use the term essential characteristics instead of significant properties?
It's actually just an artifact of previous work that we have done at the National Archives. We had done some foundational work about 10 years ago, and we had used that particular phrase internally, and just for continuity of effort, we used that.
Thank you. And there's another question by Ewan Cochrane about, can you discuss any more what your plans are for working with Wikidata?
We are definitely, I mean, I'd love to talk to you directly about that at some point, Ewan. We are still working through, in terms of our own environment, what the process is for, sustainably releasing it as like full linked data. Using archives.gov, which is why we decided that at least we would put out an actionable CSV. And I hope that we could at least have that CSV mined for Wikidata, because it includes the links to Wikidata Archive Team, Wikipedia, Library of Congress, and Pronom. And I think that it would be great if we could go ahead and start populating that, even though we don't yet have endpoints available at archives.gov.
Otherwise, lots of positive comments, and thank yous for sharing your work.
Oh, thank you for including us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next we have Catherine Thornton from Yale University Library and Ross Spencer from Artifactual Systems Incorporated, in collaboration with Ewan Cochran and Richard Lehane. And they'll be presenting Siegfried and Wikidata together at last.
Yes. Do I share my screen?
Yes, you can share your screen.
Okay. Okay. All right. Let's try. No, that's not the right button. Okay. Hey, everyone. First of all, thank you for having us, and those are some amazing talks as well. And it was great to hear the Wikidata stuff. So Kat and I and Ewan and Richard have been working on a Wikidata integration for Siegfried. Thank you very much to Ewan. This is part of his easy vision, and Richard also identified me as someone who might have some capacity to do some Golang, some Siegfried development. So he put us together, and we've got this work after 7 months. Why file formats? Well, a lot of people in the room might know, but some might not. To whatever your strategy in information records management or digital preservation, you need to know the context of the records, you need to know whether something has changed, and you need to know what you've got. With Easy becoming more appliance-like in terms of how you can access it and use it, the line between knowing what you've got and being able to use what you've got gets even thinner. And there are heaps of formats in Wikidata. So it's a really good resource to start thinking about how we connect file format identification, Easy, and using your information. But let's have a look at a demo. Hopefully this will work. And it does not look like it's going to, does it? I don't think I've got another way of getting this for y'all. You never think the live demo is going to fail on the video that you pre-recorded.
Do you have the video outside of the slide presentation?
That's a really good point, Stacey. But I think it will work in Firefox here.
Right. Okay.
He says. Sorry, folks. Okay.
So you're looking to build a Wikidata identifier in Siegfried. Let's see how we do that. First of all, here is a typical record for portable network graphics.
Ross, we're not seeing the video.
That looks as follows, which might be familiar to some, but not to everyone. Given thousands of records, how do we get this information from Wikidata into Siegfried? First of all, let's ask its partner toy, Roy, to harvest the Wikidata source.
Ross, you might need to reshare a different window, because it only shares one window, not what you're seeing on the screen.
Okay.
Here we have a chunk of
I'm sorry,
that contains
everyone.
all of the information we're going to need to identify our file formats, including line type,
I am
write,
all mixed
and
up.
other pieces. Now we need to compile that information using.
If you stop sharing and then share again, that might solve it.
Today we're going to call Roy.
Okay,
build
I'll give it a
Wikidata
go. Sorry,
without
folks.
Pronom would normally supercharge the identifier by also bringing in the pronom's binary patterns. So your Library of Congress identifier.
I'm really sorry.
It's okay. We're formal and jolly, remember?
How many
It's This is just a mess, sorry.
Don't panic, Ross. We're rooting for you here.
All right, so we've stopped the video. Could everyone hear the video okay?
Yeah, we got the sound, but just not the picture.
Just not the picture. All right.
Did you move to a different browser? Try sharing that browser now and then play. That might work.
Yeah, let's try that. You can see that?
Yep.
All right, okay. So,
Your Wikidata identifier in Siegfried. Let's see how we do that. First of all, here is a typical record for portable network graphics. A format identification pattern for that looks as follows, which might be familiar to some, but not to everyone. Given thousands of records, how do we get this information from Wikidata into Siegfried? First of all, let's ask its partner toy Roy to harvest the Wikidata source. It will pull all of the definitions from Wikidata using a SPARQL query, and then we can have a look at that definitions file. Here we have a chunk of JSON that contains all of the information we're going to need to identify our file formats, including line type, URI, and other pieces. Now we need to compile that information using the Roy build command. Today we're going to call Roy build Wikidata without pronom. Pronom would normally supercharge the identifier by also bringing in the pronom's binary patterns. Library of Congress identifier also uses the same technique. We will get some feedback here on the command line, which will tell us exactly how many pieces of information we have to work with. We can see that out of 5,962 rows of data, we end up with 4,488 records. 193 have signatures, but 4 are removed because of heuristic issues. That leaves 189 identifiers that we can use and identify file formats with. Let's have a look at how that works in Siegfried. Here is a command I made earlier. Siegfried test data wikidata wd is just a link to my 2 sample files. Here we can see that Siegfried 1.9, using the identifier built today, has identified this gzip file and this Amiga Workbench icon file. We can see that both identifiers have come from the Gary Kessler's file format signature table, but other sources are available, and if they are available for your format, they will be reported in this field. We also have a link to the format record in Wikidata, which will take you there if you click on it.
all right. Thank you, everyone. Have I got enough time to finish, Stacey?
Yeah, you're good.
All right. Can you still see the slides?
Yes.
All right. So really quickly, what did you see? You saw harvest, you saw build, you saw identify, and you saw data. Importantly, we can link file format identification back to Wikidata and access that, the records around that. What next? We need people to use it. The integration and Wikidata. You have the power of Wikidata to edit and see that information arrive immediately back in Siegfried right now, which will bring its own issues. And so we need to develop the ecosystem around what tooling do we need, what governance do we need, what guidance do we need, and how do we communicate with each other about what we're doing in Wikidata. The collaboration was between myself, Richard, Kat, and Ewan. It started kind of last November, but has been going full-time about 7 months this year, from very wide and far parts of the world, using Sprint Review, Sprint Check-in, and I've tracked about 355 hours of my time, and the rest through through everyone else, and that's just an indication about how long it takes to get this work done, and how to commit to the sort of the level of dedicated and freedom of thinking needed to achieve something like this. This is just the first iteration. More hours are needed now to shape the rest. And Kat had a couple of slides as well.
Thanks, Ross. From my screen, I'm not seeing the slides on the current one. Could you advance?
Are you able to share yours, Kat?
I don't have it pulled up right now. I was hoping to just talk from your deck.
Okay, sure. We can do that. So I'm on the Yale University Library in Easy slide.
Great, thank you. So my name is Kat Thornton, and I'm part of the EASY program of work at Yale University Library. And I'm also part of Wikidata for Digital Preservation, where we curate and contribute data to Wikidata related to the domain of computing. The EASY project is interested in Siegfried reusing data from Wikidata because the EASY project has created the UVI, or the Universal Virtual Interactor. And if you have a copy of these slides, there are links here where you can learn more about EASY and learn more about the UVI. So the UVI automatically presents a digital object for interaction by a user in a software environment that represents one that would have been in use at the time the digital object was created. To fulfill this vision of UVI functionality, we need signatures for file formats as generated by the creating software application. So we plan to store these creating application signatures in Wikidata because there's no other technical registry of file format information that has plans for curating these creating application signatures. So for EASY, having Wikidata data available in Siegfried is a first step toward having more signature data from Wikidata available in the future. The work that Ross has done to extend Siegfried is also exciting for Wikidata from a data quality perspective. Ross, would you be willing to advance it one slide, please?
Yep.
Thanks. As part of the Siegfried Wikidata work, we now have a schema for file format with identification pattern in Wikidata that we can use to validate Wikidata file format data. So this schema is a SHEX schema. SHEX is an abbreviation for shape expressions, and it can be found in Wikidata's schema namespace, which is namespace E. From there, you can use this schema to see which items from Wikidata are currently in conformance with this model and which items are not in conformance with this model. And Ross and I are hoping to use this schema within Siegfried to help determine what items in Wikidata are ready for reuse by Siegfried. So in the slides, you can find a link to this schema E237 in the Wikidata schema namespace. And I also linked to a paper that gives a full background on using SHEX for validation of data from Wikidata. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Ross.
And yeah, the last thing to say is just stay tuned. There's a lot more work to come. Some of that stuff Kat has touched upon. And it's really exciting to be working on it. And I hope you'll like it as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Ross and Kat. That's really exciting. Since we kind of went over, I'm going to pass on the question and move on to the next presentation. So hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end for you guys. So the last presentation is from a dynamic team from the Library of Congress, Kate Murray, Trevor Owens, Ted Westervelt, Marcus Napier, and Jesse Johnson. They will be presenting policies for file format assessment at the Library of Congress.
Good day. This is Ted Westervelt from the Library of Congress. My colleagues and I are very excited to be able to talk to you a little bit about what some of the work that's been done at LC on the assessment of digital file formats. About 6 years ago, the library launched the first version of its recommended format statement. This was designed as an internal guide to enable our staff to better identify the technical characteristics of both digital and physical items to be added to the collection. They have a good deal of expertise in the intellectual value of content, and they know the business landscape they're attempting to acquire in, but especially as we acquire more digital content, it becomes increasingly important to keep that in mind, those technical characteristics, such as file formats, to ensure that what we are collecting is going to last and be usable for patrons for generations to come. So we know we're not the only place that needs this, and to that end, we've made this readily available broadly, and we've been very gratified by the degree to which this has been taken up by others and used for their purposes, which is exactly what we wanted it to be. This has also made it necessary, or driven us even more so, to review this on an annual basis to make sure it's current and up to date, and we're providing useful and reliable information for our own and for the sake of our colleagues and other institutions. After 5 years, we decided it was time for a deeper root and branch sort of revision of this, trying to make sure that the fundamental structure will last now that it's become a widely used resource. And that has resulted in what we're calling internally the RFS 2.0. And to talk about what that root and branch revision entailed, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Kate Murray.
Hi, everybody. So just FYI, I keep getting kicked off our network, so I may disappear into the ether. Who knows? Anyway, I have sympathies with you, Ross. So let's talk a little bit. What Ted forgot to mention was that our RFS 2.0 was just published on Monday to coincide with this meeting. That's kind of handy. So some of the changes that have come up, we've got some new content categories to sort of better reflect what's going on in the community, and these include design in 3D, GIS, geospatial, and non-GIS cartographic and musical scores. We renamed some content categories to better express their scope. So previously we had textual work and musical compositions in the same content category. I have no idea why, but we've divided those up. And so now there's textual works and then separately musical scores. Software, electric gaming, and learning is now software and video games. Datasets and databases is now just datasets, and websites is now web archive. We made a couple of other visual changes, so we went from enumerated lists to some tables. But probably the most exciting stuff is the updated of preferred and acceptable formats across our content categories. So underpinning all of these changes was sort of a new assessment model for the recommended format statement, and we really tried to look at a level of service model for that. And this helped us define the degree to which the library itself can the Library of Congress can manage specific formats throughout their life cycle. We did this by both considering global and community criteria, as well as our local and institutional criteria. So for global and community criteria, we base that on the 7 sustainability factors at the Library of Congress Sustainability of Digital Formats website, where we do format assessment. We call them FDDs. We heard about those a couple times in earlier presentations, and I was thrilled because I also run that project. But these include disclosure, adoption, transparency, self-documentation, external dependencies, impact of patents, and technical protection mechanisms. And these can have different emphasis or important depending on what the community of practice and content type is, and they may or may not be applicable or essential for every format. And then the local and institutional factors estimate the resources available at the library, available to preserve and manage these formats, and these include things like staff experience and expertise, hardware, software, and operating system availability, and that includes the number of licenses, which we're always getting tripped up on. We have 1 license for Music XML on one guy's personal computer. I think we need to up that a little bit. And then the representation of what we already have in our collections and storage, and if we have established workflows and functionality already. So overall, this analysis has enabled us to establish a clearer definition of what we considered a preferred or an acceptable format. So for preferred formats, it means it meets or exceeds benchmarks for all of the relevant sustainability factors. And for a local institutional, it means that we have the skills, experience, workflows, tools, and systems to manage and preserve these formats in our current systems with confidence. And for acceptable formats, it means it meets minimum acceptability, across our benchmarks, or it doesn't meet all of the relevant ones. And for local and institutional factors, we can manage this format at a basic level of acquisition and management, but we maybe need to up our game for the library may need to increase its capacity with some further investment. And I think it's important to note here, an acceptable format doesn't mean it's a bad format. There are plenty of really good acceptable formats. In some cases, it means that the library needs to change its own internal or step up its own game in order to better accommodate that. And the success in using this model across all of our content categories open up the possibility of adopting it to some of the other characteristics of creative works. And so we'll be looking at that a little bit more. And so underpinning all of this is what we call the matrix. And I'm going to show you a terrible slide about the matrix. So this is, and we have a link to a blank one about this, but how do we actually rank these things? So here, there's just two examples. The one in green is for PNG, and the one in yellow is for DNG. This is kind of how we answer these questions. It's a very deliberative process within the content team. And this year, we're looking at the global sustainability factors. And in this slide, we're looking at the answers for our local institutional factors. So here we say, like, for example, we may not have the current license for Photoshop, and we might need to change that internally. And then this is how it's reflected in the recommended format statement itself. You see here in line C, PNG is listed as preferred and DNG as acceptable. And I'm going to turn it over to Trevor to wrap us up.
Great, thank you, Kate and Ted. And so just as a little bit of a wrap up, building on the great improvements that we've seen come out with the RFS and the exciting launch of the 2.0 for RSS, connects back to something we launched about this time last year, which is the Digital Collections Management Compendium. And so Jesse Johnston has joined us, who is one of who was the sort of initial editor of this, which is awesome to have him in the mix. And as some context, the idea with the compendium is that it's a resource, again, primarily for LC staff to sort of codify our practices for digital collections management and preservation in general. And so in that vein, it's an overarching context for our policy around digital collections management. So within our sort of strategic plan framework, the idea is that we want to be helping to drive momentum in our communities broadly. And so in that vein, we published it and have made it openly available as well. And so if you want to jump to the next slide, you can see an example of exactly what this looks like relating to the recommended formats statement here in the guidance under digital formats that covers how the recommended formats are enacted as policy for managing collections in the organization. If you look through the other parts of this, you can see information about inventory and custody and access. That's sort of the framework that fits all this together. And you can see in the links on the side that there's links to both the recommended format statements and the sustainability of digital formats resources, which this sort of combines together and clarifies that this is in fact enacted policy of the organization for working with collections. And so this resource is something that there's an internal editorial group that gives input on and will run on a routine revision process for. So as the RFS gets continually revised and updated, the same is true for this resource. And so folks can stay tuned and follow and see how changes in our capability and processes result in changes in our policy framework. And then lastly, as Kate had mentioned, the RFS 2.0 is published, and there's both the RFS and the DCMC are things that we continually welcome input and feedback on. They're living documents, and that's part of our concept of a policy framework, is none of these things are ever done. They're part of serious ongoing maintenance activities that we all work on together. And thank you all for this. Ted or Kate, if there's anything else you want to chime in on that I missed, don't hesitate to.
Nope, great job.
Thank you, Team LOC. That was fantastic, and I look forward to hearing more about this in the future. So it's 8 after the hour, and technically we're supposed to get out 10 after the hour, but the next session is our social time. So I'm happy to stay and listen to questions as long as you want to ask them. So do we have any questions waiting in the chat? Or does anybody want to just turn their mics on and chat?
That's a nicer way, isn't it? There weren't any questions for this last presentation, and I managed to lose there was the previous one that I lost. So if you have a question that I missed, to ask it now.
Yeah, just speak up if you have something.
Nothing from me, but I'll jump in and just say thank you everyone for your patience. I'm sorry for going over as well, Stacey. Thank you.
Oh, no problem at all, Ross. I'm glad you got it to work.
Yep,
Ewan here.
definitely worth waiting for.
Sorry. I saw a few questions about how people could contribute to the Wikidata Siegfried work. I don't know if Kat or Ross, you have something to say?
I know it's an interesting question, isn't it, Ewan? I mean, I think that final slide, I think I should have said, you know, there's like basically there's workshops in what's left to do here. There's so I don't know. We should think about how to get people together and talk about it a bit more. But it's this strange environment now where you can basically put a signature, and Tyler, I came across some of your signatures in Wikidata myself, like recently, like you can put something in Wikidata now and it will be downloaded right now with Siegfried, and you can try it out. And that's kind of where the complication lies, and I'm sure Kat will have some thoughts on that. It's like, how do we sort of bring together now the digital preservation sort of world and the Wikidata world in a compatible and sympathetic way?
What I can offer from the Wikidata side is the schema that we mentioned in the presentation can be used as a data model for how to structure a file format identification pattern that you want to submit to Wikidata. And there are multiple tools in the Wikidata ecosystem that can basically take that schema and generate a form that you could just fill in to share your signature info with Wikidata and the world. I know talking about that in 2 seconds right now probably is not super clear, but anybody who'd like to know more about that, I'd be happy to connect you with tools and tips.
It looks like Alex has been hatching a software development co-op in the chat as well, so that's exciting.
That's a very preliminary hatching. Right now I'm at stealing eggs and sitting on them.
You got to start somewhere, chicken or the egg, right?
Yeah.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, it'd be great if everyone would like to turn on their cameras and applaud our wonderful presenters, our co-chair, Patricia, and our tech lead, Angela. Yay. Thanks to all of you for attending. And I also want to thank the amazing and wonderful folks at the DPC and the Dutch Digital Preservation Network for putting together the We Miss IPRES event and giving us this chance to get together and hear what we've all been up to this year. And I guess the last thing is, yeah, please join us at the social and community get together. The Zoom link should be in the chat. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Have a good day or night.
Bye, Stacy.